explosion of some kind downtown Oklahoma City. Take a look at this picture. This is our tower cam shot, a plume of smoke.
June 11, 2001, at 7:14 a.m., Gaza's deadliest homegrown terrorist took his final breath. But the story isn't about how he died. It's about his last 24 hours alive. Timothy McVeigh wasn't your typical death row prisoner. Most fight until their last breath, filing appeal after appeal. Not Tim. He actually fired his lawyers when they tried to save his life. He called his execution state-assisted suicide. 6 years earlier, this Gulf War veteran packed a yellow truck with explosives and drove it to a federal building in Oklahoma City. At 9:02 in the morning on April 19, 1995, he murdered 168 innocent people. 19 were children in a daycare center. During his final hours, McVeigh remained eerily calm. No fear, no regret, just cold planning. But what went through the mind of America's most hated man as he prepared to die? What did he eat for his last meal? What were his final words? Did he show any remorse for the children he killed? And most chilling of all, what drove a decorated war hero to become a mass murderer? The answer might surprise you. Before we begin, please like this video, share it, and subscribe, because this isn't the kind of video you see every time. And remember, this is the final sentence. Stay with us. For 5 days, Timothy McVeigh lived in an 8 by 12-foot concrete box. Since June 6th, this holding cell had been his entire world. A bed, a sink, a toilet, and nothing else. Guards watched him through cameras 24 hours a day. No privacy, no phone calls, no visitors except his lawyers and a priest. Most death row inmates break down in their final days. They cry, scream, or beg for mercy. Not McVeigh. Prison guards were amazed by his behavior. He acted like a soldier preparing for a mission, not a man about to die. Every morning, he made his bed with military precision. He exercised in his tiny cell, doing push-ups and sit-ups. He read books and wrote letters with perfect handwriting. When guards brought his meals, he thanked them politely. McVeigh treated his execution like a military operation. He had a schedule and stuck to it. He planned what to wear, what to eat, and what to say. While other prisoners on death row fought their sentences in court, McVeigh actually helped speed up his own death. The warden later said McVeigh was the calmest condemned man he'd ever seen. It was disturbing. Here was someone who had killed 168 people, and he showed more composure than his guards. To understand McVeigh's strange calmness, we need to go back 6 years. April 19, 1995, started like any normal day in Oklahoma City. Parents dropped their kids at the daycare center on the second floor of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. Workers grabbed coffee and started their morning routines. At 9:02 a.m., everything changed forever. McVeigh had packed 5,000 pounds of explosives into a yellow Ryder truck. The bomb was made from farm fertilizer and racing fuel, ingredients anyone could buy. He parked the truck right in front of the building and walked away. 2 minutes later, the explosion ripped through the structure like a giant fist. The entire north side of the building collapsed. Concrete slabs pancaked on top of each other, crushing everyone inside. The blast was so powerful, it damaged 324 buildings across the city. People felt the explosion 55 miles away. When the dust settled, 168 people were dead. 19 of them were children under 6 years old, killed in the daycare center. Another 684 people were injured, some losing arms and legs. Later, people argued about whether McVeigh knew about the daycare. He claimed he didn't know children would be there, but his partner, Terry Nichols, said they both knew and didn't care. McVeigh called the dead children collateral damage. But how does a decorated war hero become a mass murderer? McVeigh's story started in childhood. He was bullied at school and felt like an outsider. After the Gulf War, he became obsessed with government conspiracies. The 1993 Waco siege pushed him over the edge. He watched federal agents storm a religious compound, killing 76 people. McVeigh decided the government was evil and needed to be stopped. At 7:30 a.m. on June 10th, guards brought McVeigh his final breakfast: scrambled eggs, oatmeal, toast, fruit, and milk. The same meal every prisoner got. Nothing special about it. McVeigh ate slowly and finished everything on his tray. He even said thank you to the guard who collected it. An hour later, at 8:30 a.m., McVeigh took his last shower as a free man. The guards watched as he washed himself carefully, like he was preparing for an important event. When he finished, he combed his hair neatly and returned to his cell. Back in his concrete box, McVeigh spent time with his books. He had requested 3 specific items: a dictionary, a copy of the Declaration of Independence, and a book by Marcus Aurelius called Meditations. These weren't random choices. The dictionary showed his love of precise language. The Declaration of Independence represented his twisted view of patriotism. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who wrote about accepting your fate with dignity. Guards watched McVeigh read quietly for hours. He made notes in the margins and underlined passages. One guard later said it was creepy how normal he seemed. Most death row inmates would be pacing, crying, or praying. McVeigh looked like a student preparing for an exam. The warden checked on him personally that morning. McVeigh was sitting calmly on his bed, reading. When asked how he felt, McVeigh simply said, "Ready?" At 10 o'clock in the morning, McVeigh's lawyers arrived for their final meeting. Rob Nye and Nathan Chambers had worked for years to save his life. They walked into the visiting room, hoping McVeigh had changed his mind about his appeals. They were disappointed. McVeigh sat across from them at a metal table, completely relaxed. His lawyers begged him one last time to let them file more appeals. They could delay his execution for months, maybe years. Other death row cases dragged on for decades. "No," McVeigh said firmly. "I'm done with this." His lawyers couldn't understand it. They had seen hundreds of condemned men, and all of them fought to live. McVeigh was different. He actually wanted to die. He told them he'd rather be executed than spend the rest of his life in a concrete cage. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but nothing changed McVeigh's mind. He had made his decision months ago when he fired his previous legal team for filing appeals without his permission. He wanted his execution to happen quickly. Rob Nye later said it was the most frustrating case of his career. "We had a client who was helping the government kill him," he explained. Tim saw his execution as the final act of his war against the federal system. When the lawyers left that morning, they knew they would never see McVeigh alive again. He shook their hands and thanked them for their work. McVeigh spent the afternoon thinking about his life and his crime. He had no regrets about the bombing. In his mind, he was a soldier who had completed his mission. The 168 people who died were casualties of war, not murder victims. The day before his execution, McVeigh wrote a letter to the Buffalo News, his hometown newspaper. In it, he showed zero remorse for the children he killed. "I am sorry these people had to lose their lives, but that's the nature of the beast," he wrote. "It's understood going in what the human toll will be." McVeigh compared himself to fighter pilots in World War II who dropped bombs on cities full of innocent people. He said those pilots were called heroes, but he was called a terrorist. In his twisted mind, there was no difference. Both killed civilians to win a war. He truly believed he was a patriot, fighting against a tyrannical government. The federal agents who died in his bombing were enemy soldiers, not innocent victims. The children in the daycare were collateral damage, a military term for unintended casualties. He wrote that if there was an afterlife, he would improvise, adapt, and overcome, a military motto. He even joked that if hell existed, He'd be in good company with a lot of fighter pilots who also had to bomb innocents to win the war. This wasn't the rambling of a crazy person. McVeigh's letters were well-written and logical. That made them even more chilling. He had carefully thought through his actions and felt completely justified. He saw himself as a freedom fighter, not a mass murderer. At 2 p.m., Father Charles Smith arrived at the prison. McVeigh had requested a Catholic chaplain, even though he no longer considered himself religious. He had been raised Catholic and confirmed at Good Shepherd Church in New York, but lost his faith as an adult. By 2001, McVeigh called himself agnostic. He wasn't sure if God existed, and he definitely didn't believe in hell. "Science is my religion," he once told reporters. But facing death, he wanted spiritual guidance. Father Smith spent an hour with McVeigh in private. Nobody knows exactly what they discussed, but the priest later said McVeigh was at peace with his decision. They talked about the afterlife and forgiveness. When Father Smith asked if McVeigh wanted to confess his sins, McVeigh declined. He didn't see the bombing as a sin. In his mind, he had done what was necessary to fight government tyranny. The priest offered to pray with him, and McVeigh agreed. They said the Lord's Prayer together. The same prayer McVeigh had learned as a child in Sunday school. Before leaving, Father Smith asked McVeigh if he had any final messages for the victims' families. McVeigh shook his head. He had nothing to say to them. By 6 p.m., hundreds of people had gathered outside the prison. News trucks lined the streets. Reporters set up cameras and interviewed anyone willing to talk. Some people came seeking justice. They wanted to watch McVeigh die. Others protested the death penalty. Inside the prison, McVeigh was preparing for his final meal. Most condemned prisoners order elaborate last meals, steaks, lobster, or favorite foods from childhood. McVeigh kept it simple. He requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. That was it. Guards brought the ice cream to his cell at 7 p.m. McVeigh ate it slowly, savoring each bite. When he finished, he handed the empty containers back to the guard and said, "That was good." Prison officials offered McVeigh a sedative to help him sleep. Many death row inmates take pills to calm their nerves before execution. McVeigh refused. He wanted to face his death with a clear mind and full awareness. Instead of sleeping pills, McVeigh spent his evening writing letters. He wrote to his family, thanking them for their support. He wrote to friends from the Army, explaining his actions one final time. His handwriting was neat and steady. No sign of nervousness. At 9 p.m., the prison went into lockdown mode. Extra guards were posted throughout the building. The execution chamber was prepared and tested. Media witnesses were briefed on the procedures they would see in the morning. McVeigh asked for paper and a pen. He wanted to write his final statement. The last words the world would hear from him. At 10 p.m., the lights in McVeigh's cell were dimmed. Most death row inmates spend their final night awake, too terrified to sleep. McVeigh was different. Guards watched through the cameras as he lay down on his narrow bed and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. The guards couldn't believe it. Here was a man who would be dead in 9 hours, sleeping like a baby. One guard later said, "It was the most unnatural thing I've ever seen. He slept better than I did that night." McVeigh slept for 6 straight hours without moving. He didn't toss and turn. He didn't have nightmares. He slept peacefully, like someone without a care in the world. Outside the prison, the media circus continued. Television reporters gave hourly updates on McVeigh's condition. Newspapers prepared special editions announcing his execution. The story dominated every news channel in America. At 4 a.m., guards began their final preparations. They reviewed the execution protocol one more time. The lethal injection drugs were prepared and tested. Everything had to be perfect. In a few hours, Timothy McVeigh would become the first person executed by the federal government in 38 years. Guards woke Timothy McVeigh for the last time. He opened his eyes immediately, fully alert. No grogginess or confusion. He knew exactly what day it was. "Good morning," McVeigh said to the guards. His voice was calm and steady. They escorted him to a shower area where he washed himself one final time. The guards gave him a fresh prison uniform, a white t-shirt, khaki pants, and slip-on shoes with no laces. Everything was designed to prevent last-minute suicide attempts. After dressing, McVeigh was taken to a small room where Father Charles Smith waited. The priest had returned to perform last rites, the Catholic ceremony for people about to die. Even though McVeigh called himself agnostic, he accepted the ritual. Father Smith placed his hand on McVeigh's forehead and said prayers in Latin. McVeigh closed his eyes and listened quietly. When the ceremony ended, he thanked the priest and shook his hand. Prison officials followed strict protocol during these final hours. Every movement was planned and timed. Guards stayed close to McVeigh, but treated him with professional respect. The warden checked on him personally, asking if he needed anything. "I'm ready," McVeigh replied. Those were the same words he'd been saying for months. At 6:45 a.m., it was time. 4 guards surrounded McVeigh as they walked down a long hallway toward the execution chamber. His hands were cuffed behind his back, but he walked with his head held high. No stumbling, no crying, no begging for mercy. The execution chamber was a small, sterile room that looked like a hospital operating room. In the center sat a padded gurney with leather straps. Next to it, medical equipment hummed quietly. Through a large window, witnesses were taking their seats. Reporters, government officials, and family members of McVeigh's victims watched in silence. Some had waited 6 years for this moment. McVeigh glanced at the witnesses, but showed no emotion. His face was blank, almost bored. One reporter later wrote that McVeigh looked like he was going to a routine medical appointment, not his own execution. The guards guided him to the gurney. McVeigh lay down without resistance and stared at the ceiling. Medical technicians strapped McVeigh to the gurney with thick leather belts across his chest, waist, and legs. They inserted an IV line into his left arm, the tube that would carry the deadly drugs into his bloodstream. The warden asked McVeigh if he had any final words. Most condemned prisoners make speeches, apologize to victims' families, or proclaim their innocence. McVeigh simply said no. Instead, he had prepared a written statement. Guards handed out copies to the media witnesses. It was a quote from the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Even in death, McVeigh wanted to show defiance. The poem was about refusing to surrender no matter what happens. It was his final message to the world. He regretted nothing. At 7:09 a.m., the lethal injection began. 3 drugs flowed through the 4-tube. First came sodium pentothal to make him unconscious. Then pancuronium bromide to paralyze his muscles. Finally, potassium chloride to stop his heart. McVeigh's eyes closed within seconds. His breathing became shallow, then stopped completely. His body went limp against the gurney straps. At 7:14 a.m., a doctor checked for a pulse and found none. "The condemned has been pronounced dead," the warden announced. Timothy McVeigh was gone. In the witness room, some people cried with relief. Others sat in stunned silence. America's deadliest homegrown terrorist had finally paid for his crimes. Timothy McVeigh's execution made history. He became the first person executed by the federal government since 1963, 38 years earlier. The last federal execution had been Victor Fager in Iowa, also for murder. Outside the prison, crowds reacted with mixed emotions. Some people cheered and celebrated, feeling that justice had finally been served. They held signs reading "McVeigh burns in hell" and honked car horns. For them, his death brought closure after 6 years of pain. But others felt uncomfortable with the celebration. Anti-death penalty protesters argued that executing McVeigh made the government no better than him. They believed killing was wrong, even when the state did it. Some victims' families agreed, saying McVeigh's death wouldn't bring their loved ones back. McVeigh's body was cremated at a funeral home in Terre Haute. His lawyer took the ashes, but their final location remained secret forever. There was no funeral